Well, I think we're going to get started. So good evening, everyone. I'm Dave Van Zandt, the president here at the New School, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this important, and I think it's going to be a fun event. I want to thank those who are joining us by live stream, and people on live stream can participate by putting your questions into the chat window that you should have on your screen. Also, those of you involved in social media, be part of our conversation. Use hashtag politics and policy, all one word. This is a very important series, I think, Politics and Policy 2016. We're trying to dissect a lot of the aspects of the 2016 presidential race, and I'm very proud that the New School is really sort of the first out of the block with a series on political literacy so early in this election season. We are trying to cover in our various events like this a number of different aspects of the campaign. And it's important both for citizens here in the United States as well as citizens abroad, because everyone looks to America for how does democracy work, how doesn't it work, and whatever happens here does have a large impact on the rest of the world. The New School, like that, is a global university. We have people from all over the world here, and we try to contribute firsthand to the study of our own democracy as well as what's going on in the rest of the world. The program that's been put together here at Milano includes both these events in the evenings with these discussions, as well as a group of classes or courses and students within the Milano School who are participating in a specialization on politics and media. We also, with our students, try to get them out working in the congressional campaigns as part of their education here, so they can learn about and become politically literate in order to participate in these elections. This is the second session in this series, and the New School has a long history for tolerance and for hearing both sides of the debate and hearing all the different critical points that can be made on either side. So I'm particularly pleased we have both Democrats and Republicans with us tonight. This will be, I think, again, a very informative and fun event. I think there's some questions the panel has to tackle. Whether you'll get to them or not, I don't know. But I'd like to hear about, why has the Democratic Party been so much more competitive this year than we expected it would be? What are the twists and turns we're going to see in the coming months? We know that the 2016 Republican primary field is unprecedented both in its size and scope, and the path it's been following over time. And finally, who actually is the expected or the front runner on the Republican side? I don't think it's all clear at this point in time. So again, I want to thank our speakers for being with us tonight. And I urge you all to visit our website, milanoschool.org, for course listings and future events like this, and please join us again. So now it's my great pleasure to turn it over to our own professor, Jeb Smith, who will run the evening. Jeff?
I always feel especially short when I follow him. Thank you very much, President Van Zandt. Appreciate your framing of the evening. Happy Election Day to everyone. I trust that you all came here straight from the poll sites, right? Right. So Americans have always been decidedly ambivalent about political dynasties. On the one hand, as it's sometimes easy to forget, our nation was born in a violent rebellion against dynastic rule when colonists rose up against King George. And yet in the centuries since, we've seen that one approach to getting elected to high office consistently outperforms every other approach. And that's being born into a family that holds high office. Indeed, Americans, our international image, inextricably intertwined with the rampant consumerism that we pretty effortlessly exploit around the world, often seem to choose our leaders much as we choose Prada handbags, Hermes ties. Did I pronounce that right? No, sorry. Hermes, is that right? Okay. Even our soft drinks. Who among us hasn't walked into a store and looked at a $1.99 bottle of 7-Up next to a $1.49 bottle of Super Up and decided that maybe it would be safest to stick with the brand that we know. The current race for the presidency is the logical conclusion of this ambivalent American history and culture. It's three marquee players: one, the son and brother of presidents; another, the wife of a president; and a third, a man who's literally made billions of dollars largely by affixing his brand name to properties built and managed by others, embody this ambivalence. On the one hand, we often crave the comfort, albeit superficial, of familiar political brands. And we see strong evidence among Democrats that this strain is alive and well. And on the other hand, we're often repulsed by the notion of dynastic entitlement, an instinct that we're seeing play out this year among Republican primary voters. And then there's Donald Trump, who claimed that unlike Jeb Bush, he's completely self-made. All he ever got was a piddly little $1 million loan from his dad. I know a little bit about political dynasties because in my first race for office, I ran for United States Congress for the seat that Dick Gephardt vacated in 2004. I was in a 10-way primary, and the front runner was a guy named Russ Carnahan. Mr. Carnahan's grandfather was a congressman and an ambassador. His uncle was a federal judge. His dad was a successful 2-term governor. His mom was a U.S. senator, and his sister Secretary of State. About the most civic involvement that my father ever participated in was coaching my junior high basketball team. So it was a frustrating race. I'm going to take the liberty, if you'll indulge me, for about 25 seconds to show you a brief clip from a documentary film that was made about that first campaign. Because in this 20 seconds, you can get a sense of how frustrating it is to run against a political dynasty candidate.
I believe you, guys.
But I would like to vote for you. But I'm afraid you're not going to make it because too many people are going to vote for Carnahan. I hope the best for you. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll vote for you, but I'm afraid that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only case I could make to you is that, we have, even though my last name is Smith and not Carnahan, we've got more money in the bank than he does. We have 350 volunteers.
Yeah, but you
He doesn't
only
have
have a couple of days left.
She wanted to vote for me, but she was afraid I wasn't going to win because my last name wasn't Carnahan. So you see, political dynasties and everything that comes along with them can often become a self-fulfilling prophecy in races. The candidate who's the best known automatically is usually way ahead in the earliest polls. In the first polls in our race, Carnahan was at 99% name ID, and I was at 3%. And my press secretary always reminded me that 2% of that 3% had just heard of someone named Jeff Smith. And then when you're ahead in the polls, it's very easy to raise money. And when you're raising a lot of money and you're ahead in the polls, you get good press. And when you're getting good press and you're ahead, then you continue to be ahead in the polls. And then you continue to raise more money. So it can be very frustrating. But our divergent responses to the two political dynasties in the Democratic and Republican parties this year seem to speak volumes about where we are as a country this year. And I want to delve into all that and much more and really dissect the strategies that we're seeing on both sides behind all that we see on television. And who better to do that than the people who are actually creating those strategies and the people who are covering them every day. And so we're really lucky to have an extraordinary group of people with us. And I'm going to introduce them one at a time, and then we'll get started. First, on the end, we've got Robert George. He's currently associate editorial page editor for the New York Post. He writes several editorials each week on a diverse array of topics. He's also the editor of the blog Ragged Thoughts and appears regularly on MSNBC, CNN, Fox, and many other media outlets. He previously served as director of coalitions for the Republican National Committee, and from January 1995 through May 1998 was senior writer and special assistant to then Speaker of the U.S. House, Newt Gingrich. Contemporaneous with this very busy full-time career, Rob has also held sideline occupations as a disc jockey and a stand-up comedian. And he currently performs weekly in the politically themed show Electoral Dysfunction, I know, at the People's Improv Theater. So great to have you here, Rob. Next, we've got Lis Smith. Liz failed to get me a bio as requested Fortunately, I know her a little bit. It's always dangerous, isn't it? Especially when someone knows you well.
Improvise.
So Liz is a graduate of Dartmouth College. She's a native of Westchester County here. And after Dartmouth College, she went to work. She was the second staff person on U.S. Senator Claire McCaskill's victorious U.S. Senate campaign. She worked her way up from basically a gopher doing anything to become Claire McCaskill's press secretary over the course of that year. After that, she went on to work for a candidate for governor in Kentucky, and I believe the Kentucky gubernatorial race is tonight. So if you all want to, if you're checking your Twitter, you can update us on that. And then she worked for Dan Seals, who ran for Congress in the North Shore of Chicago.
Jeff, I can save you a lot of time. Here, I actually wrote down a list of all the states I worked in. It's New Hampshire, South Carolina, Ohio, South Dakota, Missouri, Kentucky, New Jersey, Virginia, Illinois, and New York City. So that would take you a long time to go through.
That would. So thank you for saving me that. And during that time, she was the head of all rapid response for President Obama's re-election campaign, and did a fantastic job doing that. Her rival, during the time she was doing rapid response for President Obama, was the guy sitting next to her, Kevin Madden.
He was a little bit higher on the.
Maybe a little bit higher. Kevin was a top strategist for Governor Romney in both his 2008 and 2012 campaigns. Kevin's a nationally recognized communication strategist, having served as senior counselor to some of the nation's top leaders in both the public and private sector. He's designed and managed some of the nation's most high-profile communications efforts, ranging from campaigns around cabinet appointments to public advocacy and issue campaigns for a variety of business coalitions, nonprofits, and Fortune 500 companies. In addition to being senior advisor for both of Governor Romney's presidential campaigns, Kevin served as press secretary to then House Majority Leader John Boehner. Before his work as a top leadership aide on Capitol Hill, he served as the Department of Justice's national spokesman on issues ranging from national security to litigation before the federal courts. He originally hails from Yonkers, just up the road from here, and now lives in Washington. And finally, we have Annie Carney. And Annie is the national political reporter for Politico magazine, and she covers Hillary Clinton's campaign exclusively. And
not magazine, just regular Politico.
Just for regular Politico, excuse me, not for Politico magazine. Annie is a double tabloid veteran, having worked as a New York City Metro reporter for the Daily News, where she covered City Hall and the 2013 mayoral race, and the New York Post as well, where she covered everything from politics to the rebuilding of the World Trade Center site to celebrities and strip clubs. That's quite a range, Annie.
That's the New York Post.
And she got her start as a reporter covering transportation for the New York Sun. So does that make you triple tabloid or?
No. Tabloid technically is just a paper that opens like this.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Well, great. So obviously we have a pretty distinguished panel here tonight, and I want to start out by asking kind of the very question that we posed at the beginning, and we can start with you, Annie. What do you think accounts for this stark divergence in the way that Democrats and Republicans are responding to the two dynasty candidates this cycle?
Well, I think there is a little bit of, first of all, I wanted to distinguish between who you called a dynasty candidate. You called Trump a dynasty candidate, but I think he's totally different from Bush and Clinton because he's also an outsider candidate.
I would call the two of them the dynasty candidates. Yeah. Trump, I called more of a brand candidate.
Right. But I do think that there's a similarity going on because I think what's happening with Trump's popularity and what's happening with Bernie Sanders' popularity is related. And that is that people, it's shaping up to be an outsider's election, and these guys are appealing because they are not the establishment candidate. They are presenting themselves as outsiders, not Washington insiders. And one thing that I find strange, and I haven't been able to figure out about this dynamic, is why this year is an outsider's election. The economy is doing well. The president's approval ratings are the highest they've been during his 7 years. It's not 1929, and if you ask people how are you doing personally? Like, they usually say, like, I personally am okay, but they want, but it's a change and an outsider and someone who's, so I don't quite understand why Trump and Sanders and Carson are having so much success at this moment in time. I've been confused by that dynamic in the race.
Well, I mean, I think the critical word there, the critical term there was at this moment in time, and Kevin knows this all too well from 2012. If you looked at who was leading at this moment in time, you know, you saw boomlets from Herman Cain, Rick Santorum, Newt Gingrich, who at that point in their careers were outsiders. And so
Bachman, too.
Right, and and so I always caution people, look, polls are a snapshot in time, but polls right now are certainly not determinative of who wins the caucus in Iowa. And I think, like, in 2012, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think Rick Santorum was at 1% or something at this point. So I think early on in these primaries, you know, that's when people kind of get out their fear, their anger, their, you know, it's kind of their fling before they commit to a real candidate. I think that what we're seeing right now doesn't deviate from what we saw in 2012 on the Republican field, what we saw in 2004 with Howard Dean, and I think it's actually pretty consistent with a lot of what we're seeing.
Robbie's shaking your head.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree with you more. I have made, I will freely admit, I've made a number of predictions about this particular cycle that have fallen flat, so including, you know, when Trump was going to collapse and so forth. And I think I predicted Scott Walker was going to be the nominee months ago. But I'm pretty confident in saying right now that, with all due respect to my colleague here, I'm pretty confident Hillary Clinton is going to be the Democratic nominee, and Jeb Bush is not going to be the Republican nominee. And while it's a little bit unusual, given how the dynamic is played out, usually in the politics, where the old saying is that Democrats fall in love with their candidate and Republicans fall in line. There's usually kind of a tradition in the Republican Party that it's sort of whoever the next person in line is usually gets it. I mean, it's not been that in some cases, such as 2000 when George W. Bush emerged, but that's kind of been the way it's worked. This time around, while Bernie Sanders, there's definitely a love with a certain section of the Democratic base for Bernie Sanders. I think we're heading towards a Clinton coronation on the Democratic side, and the Republicans are sort of figuring out how to commit regicide. And you're starting to you saw that happening with Jeb Bush, and I think the most significant moment in the last debate was when Bush tried to come after Rubio, and Rubio kind of basically handed him his hat. And I think that was a clear example of the dynamics of what's going on the Republican side, in addition to obviously the rise of outsiders like Trump and Carson.
Also, in terms of your first question, how is it different, the dynasty candidates? There was no Trump to take the wind out of Hillary Clinton's sails as there was for Jeb Bush. Like, his low energy remark is just so damaging because it's true. And I wonder how I think Jeb Bush has proven that he's not a great candidate, but if Trump hadn't been in the race, I wonder if we'd be so sure that he is done. Maybe we would be. But there was not, on the Democratic side, it's been more respectful. The candidates, Sanders has not gone on the offense against Hillary until sort of at the JJ dinner recently, but he's promised not to run a negative campaign, and it's been much more respectful all around than on the Republican side.
So, Annie, you suggested that it seems rather incongruous to have this lust for outsider candidates, because we're accustomed to seeing that in times of economic turmoil. We saw it in 1992 with Ross Perot, and historically, if you look back a century, that's typically when you find a lot of outsider resonance. My question to you, or really to Kevin, maybe, if we can have you jump in, do you think that this broad economic prosperity and this sort of like the top line figures of the stock market or unemployment being down is really masking a much more deeply seated anxiety that's manifesting itself in this outsider sentiment?
Well, first of all, I think I think Robert and Liz are both right. But the thing I would point out right now, just to those earlier remarks, is we're not going through the process right now of selecting a nominee. We're going through the process right now. Voters are going through the process of selecting a mood, and ultimately, what happens as we get closer to caucuses and primaries, everybody starts to think, oh, leader of the free world. Okay, that means something. And that's where the Keynes and the Perrys and those guys sort of fall apart, and voters then begin to look through at these candidates through a totally different lens of consideration. And I think that's kind of what's going on there. But to your question, and there's something that Annie said earlier, voters don't, they're not looking at the metrics. Voters don't look at the economy like economists. They look at it through the lens of their own economic values and the lives that they're leading right now. And right now, the anxiety that's driving them is that, and this is something that President Obama tapped into wonderfully, and it's the reason he won in 2012, which is that they feel like the economy is changing and they're worried about it, and they want to know who's on their side. And they are very anxious about the job that they have. While everybody's telling them that it's fine and secure, they're not convinced of that. And the job that their friend just lost, they're not sure they're going to get it again, or their family member. And that, I think, is driving a lot of this economic anxiety, the idea that we're not living up to our full potential as an American economy. And I think that story's not told through the lens of what the NASDAQ's doing or what the Dow is doing. And it's certainly doesn't filter down to them when they're told they're supposed to be feeling better about it on the first Friday of every single month when job numbers come out. And I think that right now is, and I've done a lot of work now where I talk to folks about how they feel about the economy and right now, and they feel like the deck is stacked.
That's Hillary Clinton's line.
And yeah, and it's true. There's a reason she's saying that. It's not because that she came up with it on her own. I would argue Joel Benenson probably did. Mm-hmm. But they do feel that, and that is why when Donald Trump he complains about hedge funds and he talks about China stealing jobs and things like that, that's why that is actually resonating with Republican primary voters, because it's something that I think is encompassing all of the electorate right now. And they're not looking at it. Well, I think many aren't really looking at it through an ideological lens right now, as much as they're looking at it through their own life experience.
And Jeff, Professor Smith, what I would say is that as big a Democrat as I am, it's completely wrong to say that there's broad-based economic prosperity right now. Sure, we're not. It's not September 16th, 2008, where we're dealing with the fallout of Lehman Brothers collapsing, but 70% of Americans are making less than they were 12 years ago. And I think President Obama has done great work moving us forward, but there's a lot of work that still needs to be done to overcome what happened during the economic collapse. And people are still feeling that. And I think that's why people are gravitating toward people like Bernie Sanders or people like Donald Trump. But I would quibble with the term broad-based economic prosperity.
Yeah, I would say top line numbers look good. And in the same way that an ocean.
If you are a hedge fund right now, you are
exactly
swimming in money.
Yeah. And an ocean.
It's a top 1% recovery.
Yeah.
Sure. And I think something like 95% of the benefits have since 2008 have accrued to the 1%. So let's delve into that a little bit more, Robert. Hillary Clinton is campaigning in large part. She's both in 2008 and here in 2016, she's invoked memories of the prosperity during her husband's term, her 2 terms as president. She's done that a lot. And yet, at the same time, she's sort of disavowed his positions on trade, on welfare reform, on criminal justice, on financial reform.
Not on financial reform. She fully backs his deregulation.
Fully backs his deregulation, but has asked for, I guess, closing the carried interest loophole, which Bill Clinton never did. And I think rhetorically, especially since the rise of Bernie Sanders and some of the policies that Governor O'Malley has put forth, she has clearly moved to the left of where President Clinton was. Does that work? Does that work? Can you run a campaign and say, hey, look, the type of prosperity that we had back in the 90s, and yet I'm espousing all these things that my husband wasn't for.
Well, as a number of New York Post editorials have pointed out, that's a kind of an interesting square to circle, or circle square, whatever. That's interesting. I mean, so far, Democrats seem to be happy with the way that Secretary Clinton is sort of both running on her husband's record while repudiating many of the policies that helped create that record. I think it's somewhat hypocritical, but so far, she's not suffering from it. Now, she is obviously reacting to the Bernie Sanders movement, and in the previous years the Elizabeth Warren boomlet. So she's moved that way to the left. It doesn't seem to be hurting her in the Democratic in the primary. I think in the general election, when there's more scrutiny on that, and there'll be a Republican who I think will focus hard on that seeming contradiction. She'll have to answer for it.
Kevin, you want to jump in?
Well, I think at the heart of this, the heart of the challenge that Hillary Clinton faces is it's the question of authenticity. When we say, like Annie pointed out before, that Hillary Clinton's saying, well, the deck is stacked. Well, that's okay as a message, but when you were spending 2 years giving speeches to the same folks that you're hoping to regulate at $200,000 a pop, do you have an authentic voice in that debate? And I think that's why you saw the rise of Bernie Sanders, and why you see some of the other folks inside the Democratic primary trying to prosecute this case, which is they don't believe that she is an authentic messenger on this, and as a result would be not in the best position to really take on some of the big challenges that the Democrats want to take on in Washington, and that she essentially would be a compromised warrior here. And I think that's at the heart of what is pulling Hillary Clinton to the left.
Yeah, and to that point, and Kevin, and I don't say this at all in a snarky way, but he knows about the struggles with candidates with authenticity, having worked for Mitt Romney, and
the word I used back then was relatability.
And look, I gotta say this: Kevin, I think was the best hire Mitt Romney ever made. I think brought a dose of sanity and
Yonkers
realism to the campaign. So that's why I don't want to.
If I ever brought Mitt Romney to Yonkers, now that would be something.
That's another documentary.
Right, but I think ultimately, Secretary Clinton trying to be a Elizabeth Warren light on Wall Street is as credible as Mitt Romney trying to be an advocate for immigrants in the general election after he had called for self-deportation. And I think for people who follow this stuff closely, she puts out people like Gary Gensler, these guys who are top Wall Street reform advocates. But if it's like the Wizard of Oz, if you pull back the curtain, you know that Larry Summers is advisor. You know that Robert Rubin. You know that the architects of deregulation are behind her. And I think that's why on Wall Street especially, her plan was met with so much skepticism. And even on trade, I mean, again, this is just a couple years ago, she was saying that TPP was the gold standard, not could be the gold standard. And from the time that she gave 45 speeches in favor of TPP, it only got more progressive. So I think that she obviously has a big authenticity problem because I think she has the worst fave of any Democratic frontrunner in history for the nomination, and I think it's something that is going to be teased out more in the upcoming debates. I think it's going to be a huge problem because she has absolutely no credibility as a populist messenger on the economy.
So you raised one example, which I think is an interesting one, her transition from helping negotiate TPP, and this is something that you're working on right now, Kevin, with the Business Roundtable. Her transition from being a full-throated booster, calling it the gold standard, to now, I guess, saying that she said it could potentially be the gold standard, and now that she's actually seen the fine print, she's against it.
She hasn't seen the fine
Or
print.
she hasn't seen the fine print.
Nobody's seen the fine
Nobody's
print.
seen the fine print.
Except the
Okay.
negotiator.
And also, and one other point there too.
You
is
down with TPP? No, you don't know me.
You didn't believe that he was a stand-up comedian, did you?
And just to back up Kevin there, she says her biggest problem with it is that it doesn't include a currency manipulation provision as related to China, and it never was going to. She knows that. She was a Secretary of State, so even her argument for why she opposes it is completely disingenuous. So either she knew absolutely nothing as Secretary of State, or she is not telling the truth to American people.
All right, so Annie.
Fair point.
So has the press adequately dissected this?
I think so. I mean, I think her position on TPP is pretty clearly completely political. If she wasn't running for president right now, she would be for it. I think, that seems pretty obvious. I think that's the way it's been covered. But she is running for president, and this is what people do in elections, right? They take positions that help them win. That's what she's doing. So, and I don't know. The authenticity problem is certainly a real thing. I think they're trying to address that by highlighting the woman aspect this election. That addresses both the authenticity thing and the outsider thing. A new line that I'm sure Joel Benenson also wrote is, what's more outsider than being the first woman president, which to me is them responding to a poll question of, like, it's an outsider's election. When you're Hillary Clinton, you're never going to be an outsider. How do you respond?
Can I just seize on one? Can I seize on one thing? Is that this is why everyone hates politics. This is why everyone has absolutely no faith in politicians or a political system. Is because we just heard Annie say, well, this is what politicians do. They change their positions to win an election. But you know what? It doesn't have to be that way, and not all politicians do that. And I think it speaks a little bit to the character of the politician who switches their positions. It also speaks to the media's role in this, and not letting it be okay for people to say, hey, you know what, I'm running for president, so I'm going to change my position on immigration, marriage equality, trade, Wall Street reform, not even really. But I could go down a list, but it would probably take up the rest of the forum.
Has Martin O'Malley never changed a position?
The problem is, though, unfortunately, that is the way the politics on both sides are happening. I mean, there are many, the many conservatives, like rock-ribbed conservatives, members of the base who've been there for years, who are pulling their hair out because they can't believe that Donald Trump is one of the top two people, given how much he's switched on issues that are fundamental to conservatives, whether it's pro-life,
he was for
taxes,
single payer.
Single payer. Yeah, and he said, oh well, it's working up in Canada and all this other kind of stuff. I mean, but it doesn't seem to have mattered to us a certain faction of the Republican base, and it's forced other candidates to change their views on things on like, say, immigration. So
let me throw something out here. Both of you, Liz and Rob, have suggested that a lot of base voters seem to be, you're saying, how are they not, Liz, you say, how are they not understanding that she's totally inauthentic? She used to be for X, Y, and Z, and now she's not even shaded it. She's totally flip-flopped on issue after issue. Rob, you're saying the same thing about Donald Trump. Do you think this is because voters aren't aware of these, politely we'll call them evolutions on the issues, or you think it's because they don't care?
I think on the Trump side, it's because he carved out a position on an issue that the political system didn't fail to resolve over the last few years. He took the maximalist view on opposition to immigration, and that really strongly resonated with a significant section of the Republican base. And because of that view, that allowed him to enter the conversation and capture those voters and they don't. They minimize his switches on other issues because that's become a fundamental aspect. And he's drawn. And if you look at some of the more recent polls, people say a larger segment of the party says that Donald Trump speaks for them. He's trustworthy and so forth. When he first started, it was a very small number, but that's expanded. His other numbers are starting to trickle down a little bit and moving over to Carson and so forth. But that has, I think, that the failure for the Republicans and Democrats to deal with immigration in a way other than just pathway to citizenship was an opening, and Trump was the only one who wanted to jump for it, and it's given him a shield against some of these other issues.
Well, there's another element there too, Robert, which is that look, voters don't like hypocrites. They do care. They want to know. They want to know when they're being lied to. They want to know. They want information. That's why we have the $1 million campaigns or $1 billion campaigns that we have, where advertisements are used to inform people about the choice. And you actually used a great analogy earlier, Jeff. We can walk into a store and guess what? You can buy the 7-Up and the other bottle. You can buy the Pepsi and the Coke, and you can walk out. But when you walk into a voting booth, you only get one choice. So it's imperative that other campaigns do that, which is inform the voters. That's what hasn't happened with Trump. Trump gets up there and says and does. I mean, he did it today. He roadblocked coverage of a rambling speech that he gave out in either Iowa or South Carolina. I don't know where he was, but. And it was just one crazy statement after the next. He walked into studios and did an interview with Meet the Press where he said to Chuck Todd, he goes, well, how do you get your national security and military advice? He says, I watch the shows. Now,
This is true.
Now, if any other campaign would have never let him out of the building without driving his poll numbers down into the dirt after something like that. But here's what happened. The other campaigns haven't done it. You've seen jabs, you've seen some, fancy footwork around the corner, but they haven't really made a concerted effort to inform the voters in Iowa, South Carolina, New Hampshire, you name it, about the hypocrisy and the erroneous, the inaccuracy of what he is saying.
Is it because they're scared of his
right?
megaphone?
So I think there's two things. I think part of it's timing, right, which is you got to make sure asses are in the seats when you open the curtain and put the show on. And maybe they're thinking that voters aren't checked in, or many of them do have this position where we don't want to tick off these voters. Now, I think.
And Perry Perry, to his credit, actually did try and do
but he's
that,
Perry.
and it didn't.
Yeah, but he's Rick Perry.
It didn't go anywhere.
He's
That's right.
Bobby Jindal. Those aren't.
I think Bobby Jindal is ahead of Jeb Bush in Iowa right now.
Yeah, that's one poll, but I mean,
That's
we're not talking about a broad and sustained effort. There's only one group that did. Club for Growth went in with $1 million into Iowa, and his poll numbers went down there. Now, if one of these other campaigns decides to put out, and Liz knows this way, she did it better than anybody in the business, put out a balance of surrogates, drop a couple $1 million in ads, and spend every single day drawing the contrast between your vision and Donald Trump's vision for both the party and the country, that would change. I believe it would, and we just haven't gotten to that point yet in this campaign.
Okay, so you talk about, right now, when Jeb Bush in March, after whenever he reported all his money, or really even going back to December when Governor Romney thought about running for a minute, and then it appeared as if Jeb had locked up most of the money people in the party, and so Romney, backed away. I thought, Jeb was overbought, as a stock. Right now, I think he's oversold. And the reason I think he's oversold is really related to what you just said, which is his super PAC's sitting on $100 million. And Jeb Bush may not be able to be the nominee, but I think Jeb Bush can basically pick who he wants to be the nominee. Sorry, Mike Murphy can pick. Because he's got $100 million that he can destroy the candidate of his choice with. Do you think that, who do you think that money goes against? Or do you think that money becomes positive ads for Jeb?
Well, one of the things that the challenges that
Mike Murphy, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Mike Murphy is the guy who was Jeb Bush's political alter ego for his whole career for about 15 years. And because of the campaign finance statutes and the way they work, for the first 6 months of the election cycle, he basically was like this close with Jeb. And then the minute Jeb announced, he went to run the super PAC, which by law cannot coordinate with Jeb Bush's campaign. So basically, they probably spent the better part of a year plotting out exactly what they thought the strategy would be. And then once they can no longer legally communicate, now they're not doing so. This is an area of law that I know more about than I ever wanted to. But the point is, he cannot, they can't, so Mike Murphy is the guy really holding the power of that $100 million.
He is, and one of the challenges that they have right now is that so many voters are still unaware of the Bush record in Florida. So they have to spend some of that money actually introducing Jeb Bush. And I was in Manchester recently, and I didn't even get to my hotel room before I saw like 3 Bush ads. There were a lot of them, but it didn't move the numbers yet. That's one of the big challenges that they have. The other thing is $100 million looks like a lot, and it is. But remember, they don't get the discounted rate that campaigns get. So when you have $100 million right now, they're probably playing, I don't know, Annie probably knows this number better than I do, but 3 to 4 times more than a campaign will have to pay. So that money doesn't go as far as it would if those were hard dollars being raised. And they were in the campaign account of one of the campaigns.
Well, no, and as a matter of fact, we ran a column in today's Post actually by Noah Rothman, who's an online editor at Commentary, and he talked about this issue involving PACs, and Scott Walker is a great example of this. When he dropped out, he still had, I don't know whether it wasn't 20. He had still had 20 million in his super PAC, but his campaign was broke. He just, there wasn't the hard dollars that in there to pay for the offices and staff and so forth. So he ended up dropping out. So just because, 100 million is obviously a lot more than 20 million, but just because Jeb is flush on that side, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's gonna be an impact going forward if he's still burning through in terms of the actual campaign itself.
Rich and cash poor.
And
It's what?
It's like being house rich and cash poor. But my question also with that money, you might know better, is if you're tanking like Jeb Bush is, and there's donors who have given you $100 million to your super PAC, can they say, like, don't spend it on you? We want the money back.
That's actually what's happening. You are seeing some of these donors, because they have shown indications in the last few weeks where they don't see Trump as their biggest problem, and they don't see Carson or Cruz as their biggest problem, but they see the rise of Marco Rubio as the problem. And there are many donors that are close to the Bush world that are also very fond of Marco Rubio, and they are sending, I know this is all anecdotal, but the word is that they're sending the message, don't spend my money on destroying Marco Rubio because he may be the best option after you. And you see that poll after poll, the number 2 choice of so many inside this electorate is Marco Rubio.
So that money just it's not like totally his money to do what he wants with.
yeah,
Well,
but
it's not Jeb Bush's, you're right, and it's not Mike Murphy's. There's still somebody on the other end of that wrote that check.
But I think also Kevin and I saw this in 2012, and I'll speak for myself, but is that everyone said, oh my God, the super PACs are going to completely change the atmosphere and change the environment. Frankly, the super PACs on the presidential level, at least, kind of sucked. I don't think American Crossroads did you guys a ton of favors. I thought a lot of the Republican super PACs were a little bit off message. And on the Obama campaign, we had to spend about 2 weeks talking about how a poorly funded Democratic super PAC called Priorities basically accused Romney of putting a guy in a coffin. So, the super PACs, I think, have their limitations. And I think that when people think that super PACs are going to dominate elections, they have to realize that in some ways super PACs are rackets and they're not particularly well run or particularly strategic in how they spend their money.
So a couple of you guys have raised Rubio, and that brings me to kind of a broader question about where we are as a country demographically and the just transformation that we're in the midst of. We, of course, I think 2 years ago was the first year, either 2 or 3 years ago was the first year in which the majority of babies born in this country were of color. And so my question is, does the Democratic Party risk losing either voters of color, Latinos in particular, and younger voters by nominating someone who's old and white?
I think from the Democratic perspective, I think, Rubio presents a new set of challenges, but he's wrong on the policies. He backed off comprehensive immigration reform, and if you want to talk about young people, his stance against abortion in every case, no exceptions for rape or incest or anything like that, make him unelectable. So I think you underestimate the intelligence of the American voter by saying that just because someone is Latino, that they're going to get the Latino vote. It certainly will help him, and I think against someone like Secretary Clinton or Senator Sanders, both of whom have, I think, very, very troubling records on immigration, that it can be a mixed bag. I think they can muddy the water, but. I don't think just because he's Cuban in descent, I don't think the votes necessarily go to him.
Talk about Secretary Clinton's very, very troubling record.
Well, if you look,
I hadn't heard that from your campaign quite in that way.
But I think if you look at some of the rhetoric that she used during her Senate career, I think it was much more hawkish than anything you see now. I think what you saw in 2008 was one of the big moments in the debates was when the issue of driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants came up. And now it's kind of
I forget who the governor was that brought that up.
Right. I think it was a pretty common sense. A lot of states have now adopted it because it makes sense from an economic perspective, a public safety perspective, and that was something that she backed off of for political reasons. And I think even now, what we see from her on immigration is still. It's very, very conservative. She's saying that we should leave issues like the DREAM Act, issues like driver's licenses, to the states. So, and I think it's really hard to call yourself a progressive when your view of governing is fundamentally conservative. And as a progressive, it's really troubling to say we should leave stuff to the states when 32 states are governed by Republican governors.
Right.
Well, I mean, I would, I can understand on the issue of the DREAM Act, but I mean, something like driver's license is a state issue. I mean, it's always been a state issue.
Well, with this, I was referring mostly to her comment in the last Democratic debate where she talked about the DREAM Act, and there is broad Democratic consensus. And I think there are Republicans who support a national DREAM Act. It's a common sense economic policy, one that helps educate our workforce and integrate more people more fully into our societies. So the DREAM Act is certainly not a state policy, and that's one we can enact on the federal level.
So, Rob, you remind me there that I've been remiss in not acknowledging a couple of the luminaries in the room. First of all, Governor Spitzer, former Governor Spitzer, is with us today. And secondly, the Dean of the Milano School has joined us as well. Michelle DePass is here. So, thank you guys for joining us. Moving to Rubio, one of you, I can't remember who it was, alluded to that absolutely devastating line he gave in the debate when Jeb Bush turned to him, if any of you saw the debate, and attacked him for having missed a lot of votes during his presidential campaign. And Rubio looked at him with this almost like pitying sense that could have only come from like a deep familiarity. And he said, Governor, someone has obviously told you that attacking me would be beneficial to your campaign. And, I have tremendous respect and admiration for Governor Bush, and it's basically a shame to see him being this way. And then he turned in a very sunny way and broadened sort of his body language out. And it was really just incredibly demeaning, while at the same time posturing as being magnanimous. And it was one of the best, I think, executed feats of political
executed
rhetoric.
Is a great word. Yeah.
Best executed feats of political rhetoric I've seen in my life in a debate. Thoughts on that and the degree to which was that scripted? Because everything Jeb Bush did seemed totally scripted. Everything Rubio does even when it is scripted, doesn't come off that way.
Well, I'm sure he practiced that. I mean,
Yeah.
that was an editorial in that day's paper, I think. So obviously he knew he was going to get a question on his Senate voting record. But Bush just didn't, like, he came at him, and then he didn't have the the 2 of the 1-2 punch. It was pathetic. It was like definitely a horrible moment for Bush, who tried to go on the offense and then just got slapped. In terms of the issue of showing up, it's like the same issue Obama had, but he just kind of said, I show up for the important ones. I don't know. I think that Rubio is right to swat it away. Like, the issue is sort of complicated. Like, if you don't allow people who are senators to miss votes to run for president, then only former elected officials can run for president. I think that he can get out of this issue and not resign.
Yeah, and based on what's happening with Gilmore, Pataki, Santorum, and Jeb, former elected officials don't appear to be doing well this
So
year.
I think it's it happens to a lot of people. Obama dealt with it just fine. But yeah, I thought that exchange definitely stood out as one of the most important moments of the Republican debate, and was just another sign of how wimpy Bush is. Like, it was just wimpy.
Well, never give your opponent a take-home exam. Because you can cheat on a take-home exam. You can look up the answers. They had been telegraphing that they were going to go after that for days. The Rubio campaign knew this, so they had prepared the perfect answer that they knew was going to get them through it. It's just one of those things. And I think what you saw in that moment was it was illuminating the contrast between the two candidates and their skills. I think in the minds of many voters, they're sitting at home wondering which one of these candidates is going to be the best one to draw the kind of contrast and to take on Hillary Clinton. And I think it was overwhelmingly in Rubio's favor at that moment. And then I think what you're seeing too is Rubio is emerging as a fantastic, polished campaigner. And that is something that some candidates, they just don't get better. He is actually getting better. Yeah, to use a sports analogy, like, I think he watches the game tape, he sees where he misses a block, and then he reminds himself never to miss that block again, and he just gets better and better and stronger and stronger. And I think that's one of the key advantages that he has as a candidate going through this when we get to the caucuses and primaries.
And I think he's also has a skill that both President Obama and President Clinton in particular, had, which is managing to explain complicated things in a fairly, around the dinner table kind of a language. If he wants to, there was an interview with him at the Council on Foreign Relations, and he can dig deep into the weeds of policy as much as the next guy. But he can also talk about it in a he's not going to be as folksy as Bill Clinton, but he can talk about it in a way that the average person is going to be understand and relate to. And I think even though he is as Mitt Romney might say, even though he is severely conservative on, say, pro-life and other social issues, I think he's got the kind of a skill that will resonate with. He's obviously not going to get far left voters on that issue, but those that are in the middle when it comes to questions like abortion, I think he's going to be able to make his point, make his case, and they'll give him a fair hearing. So I wouldn't just necessarily just reject just because he's very pro-life that's going to be rejected by the voters.
I'll say this: Mitt Romney was far, at least supported common sense exemptions. I think that abortion should be left between women and their doctors, and I think when men, and especially Republican men, inject themselves into it, that's incredibly offensive. But we put millions of dollars just destroying Mitt Romney in mail, in TV, in Columbus, in Cincinnati, in the major markets in Florida, and he had a much more common sense position than Marco Rubio did. So, that's child's play compared to what we're going to do to Rubio should he become the nominee.
See here,
child's play. What an interesting choice of words.
Well, so talking about Rubio here, it kind of reminds me, we're in New York City. So has everyone seen Annie Hall? you remember the scene outside the movie where that blowhard is talking about Marshall McLuhan movies or whatever, and Woody Allen says, "Wouldn't it be great?" He's like, the other guy comes out of the line, and he's like, "Well, I'm actually, I'm Marshall McLuhan," and I think that's who it was. Was it Marshall? And he says, and you know nothing about my work. You're absolutely wrong, and I don't know where you get this ridiculous idea. And Woody Allen turns to the camera and he says, "Wouldn't it be great if the world really worked like this?" Well, we've got one of those situations tonight, and let me explain how. Jeb Bush's campaign just leaked a strategy memo, a 112-page strategy memo, the one in which, as Kevin alluded, they telegraphed the attacks that were going to come on Rubio. And one of the other things, nuggets from that memo, was a little note, and it said, people who have looked closely into Rubio's personal finances have not liked what they found. Now, that seemed to imply that when Mitt Romney was vetting Rubio as a vice presidential candidate, it was something, the Romney campaign saw some things that it found disturbing. Subsequently, a top Romney aide said, no, that wasn't really how it went. He wasn't disqualified. Tonight, we have someone here who might be able to answer that question. Kevin?
No, it's exactly right. And I've seen that it's not only been applied to Rubio, it's been applied to a couple of the others that were talked about. I know somebody did the same thing, said the same thing about Chris Christie, too, and we were forced to disavow that. And it doesn't sound like it's not a sexy story, but Romney had his heart set on Paul Ryan, I think, from the moment he met him. I remember being at that meeting when we went down we flew down to Washington. We met with the RSC, and then we had a private meeting with afterwards. And Romney was he was in love. He was just all he did was talk about Paul Ryan all the way back to the airport and on the flight home. So.
And it appeared to be
wanted
mutual.
Paul Ryan, and you go. The vetting for these things is very intensive. It goes on. Imagine any one of you sitting here if you had lawyers in a room for 2 months going over every single thing every single financial transaction or your college records, anything. You'd all be like, "There's going to be something in there that's going to be something that you're not happy about." Trust me. There's been a couple of bar brawls outside of Cortland, New York, and upstate New York that are in mine. So. But it's always something. But the idea that it was that he was not chosen because of that is just not accurate. Paul Ryan was chosen because Paul Ryan was the best choice for Mitt Romney. So
So we talked a little bit about a devastating moment that may have been, I think thus far you'd say, a real inflection point in the Republican primary. The comment that Rubio made on stage. I want you to just we'll go down. We'll start with you, Annie, and we'll go down. What was the worst mistake you've seen by any candidate of either party, tactically or more broadly strategically, thus far?
Using a private email server as Secretary of State and not turning it all over to the Justice Department at the beginning of this and drawing it out for 6 months of the campaign and doubling down and having nothing to apologize for was devastating. I think they're over. Well, I don't know if they're over right now, but yeah, the way they handled it was bad. Yeah.
Kevin?
I'd say it was more of a missed opportunity, and I'd have to throw all of the Republicans in on this one. It's that when I heard Donald Trump say that he got his military advice from watching the shows, I thought that was as disqualifying a comment as I've ever heard somebody who is actually seriously being taken into consideration for being leader of the free world. I just couldn't believe that wasn't a 2-week story that one of the other campaigns seized upon. I know that Lis Smith or Kevin Madden are sitting in respective rapid response rooms. I would call in my entire staff. I'd say, kiss your wives, your husbands goodbye. Say, make sure someone's watching you feeding the cat or walking the dog. We're going to be here for 2 weeks, and we're not leaving here until we drive this guy into single digits. And I can't believe I can't believe we're not talking about it today. As a big moment that, remember when Donald Trump was in the race?
He gets a lot of free passes, I think, for things.
It's amazing. And reporters will explain to you. I mean, I won't speak for any, but like reporters will say, I was going to write something about it, but then like 2 minutes later, he said something equally crazy. And my editor was like, no, I need you to write about this now. And so it's hard to keep these. We're no longer living in this 24-hour news cycles. We're living in a 24-second, 140 character
People
news cycle.
thought his comment about McCain would be the end of him, right?
There were so many iterations, yeah.
But remember, nobody moved into that space quick enough. They thought that the comment alone would do it, and it doesn't. I mean, remember, it's not like Mitt Romney said 47%, and like the Obama campaign was like, oh well, that's going to kill him, right? Let's go take a 2-hour lunch. Like they, right? And just
yes.
with reckless abandon decided to make our lives miserable for the next month. And
We did get in that room and have that conversation.
Right, that's what you do. That's what you do. Yeah.
I mean, I think I've got to probably back up Annie on that because how many months it's dragged on and how much worse it's gotten, and I think how poorly they've handled it. She has the worst trustworthy numbers. I think her people trust Donald Trump more than they trust the former Secretary of State. I think that's crazy, and I think part of it has to do with the fact that, she's like a weather vane, and she changes her positions on every single issue depending on what the political mood is. But I think a lot of it has to do with the fact, but I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that this just completely bungled handling of the emails. And I think early on, if she just told the truth early on, that she could have, stem the bleeding a little bit, but she just let herself bleed out over the course of 8 months.
Lovely.
But before we go to you, Rob, I want to just let the audience know, because I no doubt there are some Hillary Clinton fans in the audience, that we reached out to the Clinton campaign to see if they wanted to have a representative on the panel, and had some fruitful discussions with them, but ultimately they declined. So they did have a chance, though. Rob?
I think I'll take it from a slightly different view. I think arguably one of the most devastating statements, though it does sort of kind of address what Liz and Annie said, was look how well Hillary Clinton was doing until we formed the Benghazi Committee. That single statement by the House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, I think gave new wind to the Clinton campaign, and then it was a really remarkable statement because of that single statement. Paul Ryan is the Speaker of the House today, and Kevin McCarthy is not. It perfectly set up Hillary Clinton for the 11 hours in front of the Benghazi Committee, which, coming about a week after a debate where she got very good reviews, helped push the email stuff is still out there because the FBI and Justice Department are looking into it and so forth. But in terms of, it turned what was her biggest self-inflicted wound over the emails into a really, really big, powerful win for her, and it seems to be continuing to resonate. So, when the inevitable obituaries of the 2016 campaign are written, I think that's going to turn out to be a rather significant self-inflicted blow for the Republicans, and something that the Clinton campaign handled so far masterfully in terms of getting them on the rebound.
Also, in terms of not letting comments and opportunities go by unused, like 47%,
Right, totally.
The Clinton campaign knew what that was the minute it happened and used it for everything it was worth. And their outside groups like Correct the Record, they milked that for everything it was worth and did a very good job of capitalizing on that comment. They didn't just let it say well, that'll speak for itself.
Yeah,
And really,
it hasn't. I mean, it's still not going. The whole email stuff is still hurting her in terms of her, the dishonesty issues and favorability and things and things of that nature. And if she's the nominee, that's still something that she's going to have to deal with in the general election. But in terms of bringing scared Democrats back home to her. I think the way the Republicans bungled it, that's really worked.
So we've talked about the way the Republicans bungled it, and I want to ask you guys: Did Bernie bungle it, or was that a wise move?
What?
At the debate, because we talked about what Kevin McCarthy did, but it was equally powerful, I think, to have someone who you're running against right now interrupt, basically the whole debate, and the moderator's question and say, the American people are sick and tired of your damn emails. And just as you talked about the Clinton campaign immediately seizing on the Kevin McCarthy comment, well, Hillary Clinton herself immediately went across the stage and
actually what he said was, I'm sick and tired of hearing about your damn emails, which made it even worse.
Yeah.
I mean, from a, I think, political malpractice point of view.
Yeah. So Rob, you think it was total political malpractice for him to give up the issue that seems to have hurt her worse than any other over the last year?
Oh yeah. I mean, you don't have to necessarily. I mean, you don't have to pile on, but. If there are certain objective things that are out there on the table that aren't being pushed by the Republicans, the fact that the FBI is looking into this, that the Justice Department is looking at this, and you've had a federal judge slap the State Department for not turning over the emails in a timely fashion. These are objective things that a candidate it's reasonable for him to point that out. I mean, again, I recognize that the Democratic base is not the same as the general electorate, and Democrats may not necessarily want to hear about this. But hey, look, there are people, the Feel the Burn people, the O'Malley's, the other people, who have questions about Hillary Clinton's honesty, sincerity, and so forth. And it's an issue that's out there. And I think for the top challenger to the top candidate, for him to just basically say, we're sick and tired of it, we don't want to hear about it, I think that's political malpractice.
I think what's interesting is, one, I would just say that anyone who watched the debate would say that there was very little strategic coherence to a lot of the things that Bernie Sanders did that night. And I think if you saw a lot
Once
of the...
again, tell us how you really
Right. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But I think that and I think that was a lot of the analysis the next day. I do think a lot of Democrats are sick of hearing it. They're sick and tired of the fact that our party is being defined by some email server that's hidden in some random dude's, kitchen in Colorado. But what's interesting, though, is how his rhetoric has shifted since, which is today he said, yes, I am sick of hearing about the emails, but as you know, there are ongoing investigations into them.
He's all over the place.
So now he's clearly trying to walk it back, and by talking about the investigations. So I think he realized that, again, I don't think there's any rhyme or reason to it. I don't think there's a lot of strategic coherence to what he did that night.
And I would just say, just super quick, I thought, and I don't always agree with your strategy with O'Malley's campaign, but I thought you guys, and I want to get into that in a minute, but I thought your guys' line on that has been kind of pitch perfect from the start, which is, we believe this is an issue for Secretary Clinton and her lawyers to deal with, which is like, I'm not going to attack, but you're basically saying like,
you got to work the word authorities in there. So
the authorities.
That's my Republican message.
Annie, let me let you jump in.
I was just going to say that it was like a short-term win for Bernie. They sent out a fundraising email that night with that clip, and I talked to Tad Devine, his strategist, who said, we want to get Hillary's supporters. That's we need to win over. So this is trying to appeal to her people, because her people don't dislike him.
Right.
But I think that their bigger issue is trying to turn him into like a mainstream candidate who can go negative. And then in Iowa, he went negative on her and everything else. I just think that there is no coherence to what they're doing. And I think the reason is that Bernie just wants to talk about his stump speech and his he's relentlessly on message, just wants to do that, and he has a team of like actual strategists who are trying to turn him into a regular candidate, and I think that's the tension there, and whether that can actually work now that they have money and it's like a real operation now. Can he be a real candidate who can? But I think that's why they look like they're all over the place. It's trying to marry those two things.
Right. Kevin, you agree?
Yeah, Liz hit on something, which was during the debate, or right before the debate, the Sanders folks were bragging that he didn't prepare, and I said, well, it kind of looked like it. But look, debates. If you're not on offense in debates, you're losing. And one of the things that he lost with letting it go by was the chance to stay on offense. Now, I think there's a great amount of risk in looking like you are piling on and that you're going after, like his path to those Clinton voters was not through the emails. It's much more through the authenticity and the relatability and the progressive warrior message. And I think he ought to have used the question that people had about the emails and the trust issue and the honesty issue to really make a case about how he is the more honest, firmly rooted progressive who's going to fight. And he missed it in a moment there during that
Although,
debate.
to play devil's advocate, it was the most, that's the line you remember.
It was the line of the night.
Right.
But so for Bernie, you made the point that for Bernie Sanders, there was short-term high right then. And he raised money off and all that. And actually, my first tweet at the end of the debate was, I feel like tonight was a sugar high for the Clinton campaign. Because Republican super PACs or deputy inspectors general in one of these departments that's looking into the server, they're not, your average Republican operative, they're not sick and tired of the damn emails.
Right.
And she's going to have to answer these questions at some point. And one of the things that's been interesting about watching the debate schedule, the Democrats barely have any debates, Republicans have a ton of them. Well, who knows what Republican debates are going to be like with all the mess there. But are Democrats potentially hurting themselves by not fully airing these issues? So I'm not asking from a Bernie Sanders perspective. I'm asking from a party perspective.
I think that her lawyers and the authorities will flesh this out. So.
That's funny. Well, so Liz, or anyone, O'Malley's a little bit of a mystery, I think, for a lot of people right now, because in many respects, I'm getting the death eye here, so I'm not going to look at her. But he looks like a president kind of straight out of central casting. He's got sort of like a Kennedy-esque thing. He's young, he's handsome, he's incredibly smart, he's accomplished. He was, called one of the best governors in the country, repeatedly during his term.
You're talking about Romney?
They actually have a lot of
two-term governor there.
Yeah. No, I'm talking about the one that was confident enough to run for re-election. There
you go. That was the line. There you go.
You're a bar brawler, so am I, Kevin. But look, O'Malley has not gotten the traction that a lot of people thought he would get. He's recently got a little bit of a bump in Iowa, but Bernie seems to have stolen his thunder. And I'm wondering, and why don't we actually start with others and kind of see what others thought, and then we'll let you respond. Do you think that there was an alternative strategy that O'Malley could have embarked upon, or do you think it's just right now, Kevin, you've talked about mood, that maybe a lot of voters just aren't in the mood for like an accomplished, successful, almost sort of technocrat, like a good manager?
Can I actually take this one first? Yes. Okay.
I don't think anyone's going to fight you.
This is what I'd say, is there an alternative strategy? No, he's not going to do a reset. He's not going to reinvent himself. He's not going to change his positions on every major issue. He's not going to etch a sketch. That's not who he is. He is a great manager. He was a two-term big city mayor, two-term governor, who arguably got the most progressive accomplishments of any governor in the nation. But this is the thing. To be a successful executive, whether you're a mayor or a governor, you don't do it by yelling and screaming. You don't do it by being a showboat. You do it by being someone who can go work the pavement, get Republicans, Democrats who are of a different ilk over to your side. And I think that's why he was successful. And I think, look, we are in a time of anxiety, anger, and fear. And I think there is a lot of economic anxiety out there. And I think that's what we've seen this summer with the rise of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. But I think that when the fear, when the anger, when the anxiety goes away, when people actually have to say, shoot, okay, well, I have to choose a president, I don't think that people are going to pull the lever for Bernie Sanders because, like, the French may have needed a revolution. The Democratic Party doesn't need a revolution. What we need is a progressive, proven leader who can build on President Obama's record, and he's the only guy in this race that can do that. But this is what I'll say is that, look, it's November, and as you know, and Kevin, as a professional and someone who's done many of these campaigns, can attest to is that people who are peaking in November aren't necessarily the people who win in February.
Kevin, at the risk of ending your friendship with Liz, what
Yeah,
would you
And vice versa, right?
The in the Republican side, I'm so used to the idea of you have to run and lose in order to learn how to run and win, and also build the kind of infrastructure that you need. I mean, remember, presidential campaigns are the fastest startup companies in the world. They go from 4 people in a room trying to put together an email list to being billion-dollar organizations within the space of a year. Like, that's incredible. That I think is Martin O'Malley's biggest test right now, which is that you have essentially the Clinton conglomerate, which has been built up and has its supply chains and its financing all already in place, and has had so for probably the last 20 years. Now, the opportunity, as Liz has pointed out, is still there, which is that there is a definite anxiety or unhappiness with the status quo. And there is a chance for somebody who can come in and make a case against that status quo that, in a way that could be disruptive to that status quo, can make a case to the voters. I just tend to think that right now that Hillary Clinton will be the nominee because she has so much of this advantage. And we always talk about the quiet primary or the sub-primary, invisible primary, but it's so much. It's such a bigger deal, I think, on the Democratic side because
the invisible primary. When Kevin says that, he refers to basically all the behind-the-scenes positioning that's happening before we even are paying any attention at all to a presidential primary. So basically, the invisible primary ended about 6 months ago.
And I think crucial to that is the
3 or 4 months ago.
superdelegate work that Hillary Clinton did in 2008 and now has at her disposal now. So I think that's just a huge advantage.
I guess the question I'd ask Liz is why do you think it's been so difficult for Governor O'Malley to break through? I mean, it would be one thing if he was at sort of like 10 or 15%, and maybe can then bolt up and challenge the top 2. But I mean, he's in single digits. I mean, there were some polls at one point where he was actually like almost like a point behind people who've already dropped out. So what do you think is? Well, that's number one, and I guess number 2 is: do you think, despite his success in Baltimore, do you think the rise of Black Lives Matter has made that success look like a liability amongst Democrats?
Well, to number 2 first, I think that I think what he did in Baltimore was, I live in Baltimore now, and I mean, he turned the city around, but a city that had as many problems as Baltimore did, that takes decades. That doesn't happen in a matter of just 7 years. From 1999 to 2009, they had the biggest drop in Part 1 crime of any major city in the country. They stopped losing population. They had the biggest population loss of any major city in the country, even beating Detroit, and he turned that around. So he did a lot of things. Of course, the incidents of this last spring were a setback, but let's not fool ourselves. I mean, Secretary Clinton in the 1990s is one of the biggest advocates for the 1994 crime bill, which expanded death penalty, which disproportionately affects and it disproportionately is applied to people of color. She backed the 1994 crime bill, which implemented mandatory minimum sentences and led to the problem of mass incarceration that our society faces. So I think she was complicit, and as was Bernie Sanders, who voted for the bill, in something that had much longer lasting negative ramifications for communities of color. So look, I think all of us, I think Black Lives Matter has elevated the very important discussion that we need to be having as a party and as a nation about criminal justice reform, and has challenged all three candidates on that. And we certainly saw that with Secretary Clinton last week. But I don't think he's alone in being challenged by them. But I think we should commend, a lot of the important work that they've done, because, and Jeff, as someone who's worked on these issues, that they have been backburnered for so long. To your first point, which was about why hasn't he broken through? Look, I think it's a wacky year. I mean, we were talking about 2012, but even in 2012, you didn't see Herman Cain leading the polls for over 100 days like Donald Trump has. And I don't say this in a dismissive way, but with Secretary Clinton, she is in some ways a worldwide celebrity and an accomplished one. And I don't mean that in the way that McCain said about Obama in 2008, but someone who's beloved, worldwide. I think there are big institutional challenges facing that, and there also is the anxiety and the big anxiety, and I think that Senator Sanders is able to tap into. The bigger issue with Senator Sanders is that, as we saw in the debate, it's hard for him to go beyond just talking about, vilifying the millionaire, billionaire class. And so I think that's where, now that's down to three people, I think he's got a unique experience and a unique opportunity to break through. He's the only one that doesn't just talk about progressive values, has actually gotten them done. And I think that, the debates will provide an opportunity to get through.
And also we should remember that I think at the start of December, Kevin, you can check me here, but I think at the start of December, Rick Santorum was at 1% in Iowa. So, and then he won Iowa.
And that's what's unique about Iowa and New Hampshire, is that you can build a candidacy one handshake at a time.
I would say, though, I wrote a story right after Bernie Sanders got in the race saying Bernie Sanders could pose a bigger threat to Hillary Clinton than Martin O'Malley, and it felt really counterintuitive and smart at the time. And now it seems so obvious. I'd say there's not as much variety of ideological positions on the Democratic side as there is on the Republican side. So there's not that much room to be between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, and he ate up the space on the left, and you can't really be to the left of him on a lot of issues, and she's not that far to the right. There's everyone, all three of them are more narrow, closer to each other.
Right, yeah.
And then I looked at him
agree.
covering the Iowa JJ dinner 2 weeks. I don't cover O'Malley a lot, but I saw him 3 speeches in back-to-back, all three candidates speak at a really important Democratic dinner in Iowa. And he's a soft-spoken, smart guy, and there's this yeller, and then there's Hillary Clinton, who's her own thing, and he's good-looking, and maybe he needs to be messed up a little bit. I don't know. Maybe he should have had some stubble. But you're saying you didn't want to change him.
It's the year of bad hair, and his hair is just too perfect.
I just looked at him up there, and I was like, that's a nice guy. And maybe he needed to be shaken up a little bit.
I mean, if the worst insult you can get is that you're too good looking, I mean, I think
it wasn't the year for the good-looking, soft-spoken candidate.
Right, but I mean, I think that speaks to it, right? He's not a guy who's he'd change around every position on every major issue. He's not a guy who's gonna yell and scream to the rafters. But he's a guy that gets stuff done.
So,
and I think that's what a lot of people are looking for, and we have a chance to communicate that more clearly.
So, Anna, you just said that you talked about the differences on policy within the Democratic Party versus differences on policy within the Republican Party. And I want to flesh this out just a little bit because, Kevin, you said something earlier that kind of got my attention. You talked about the mood being so important. You said they're not necessarily right now, voters aren't necessarily looking for a mood, but they're not looking for a candidate, but they're looking for a mood. And I think I disagree with that because the middle ground would be they're looking for a candidate. The kind of more superficial ground would be they're just kind of looking for a mood. I actually think it goes much deeper. I think they're trying to figure out what their party is. I think the Republican Party is going through a sort of rebirth, if you will. I think the differences are so substantial not just stylistically, but substantively, that I think your party's trying to figure out what it should stand for that can remain true to principles of the party, and yet win a presidential election.
That's not inconsistent with what I said.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, don't look at elections as events. They're a process, and voters go through that same process. Voters look around, they shop around, they if you look at the 2012 example, they wanted a distillation of the economic record, of the economic agenda of the Republican Party, and they wanted that at the forefront. So when you stand on a debate stage and yell 999, it's like, oh yeah, that's so easy. And like, meanwhile, Governor Romney was putting out like a 62-point plan, right, or a 59-point plan. I remember that was the big joke by reporters. They were like, "What was number 60?" Like, that got left off. And then when Newt Gingrich was ascendant during the campaign, it was because he was forcing this clash of political civilizations, us versus the Democrats, the welfare state versus the takers versus the doers, and that was incredibly animating for them at that point. That was their mood at that point during the campaign. Then when you get through Iowa, and a lot of these voters, they say, like, I want somebody who reflects somebody like me. I don't want a blow-dried politician who's a businessman. Instead, I want somebody who's going to speak to the core values that I hold. And there you had the ascending campaign of Rick Santorum. So my point is that they go through registering a mood, and at a certain point, then they select a nominee. Mm-hmm. And when the campaign ultimately shifts to that decision-making process, they begin to make the decisions are less about who is it that is speaking to my hopes, dreams, fears, aspirations, or anger, and instead it's who. Then it swings to a point where they say, who is it that I can see as in the Oval Office? Who is it that I can see accepting the nomination in Cleveland? Who is it that I can see as leader of the free world across the desk from one of the other foreign leaders? And that, I think, is ultimately the end part of the process. So I think right now the ascending campaigns of Carson and Trump are speaking to what it is that their mood is, that they're very unhappy with the status quo in Washington, and they want to send a message. But my belief, and again, this is what we make bets on where we think the electorate's going to, where the puck is going to be when we want to put it in the net, not versus just chasing it around, is that we're going to have a nominee that is much more from the traditional bracket than the anti-establishment bracket, and that nominee will have won because they answer two fundamental questions: does this person understand the problems of people like me, and can I see them as our president?
Just to piggyback on that, right now, it seems that we've got to keep these, and I apologize because, like Kevin, I'm going to be like a guy that's going to make yet another sports analogy, so I apologize on that one. But to use the bracket analogy, you have the makings of a potential Final Four of Trump, Carson, Cruz, and Rubio. Both Cruz and Rubio borrow from both the establishment and the insurgent wings, and I think you're going to see. I think some of the future clashes are going to be between Cruz and Rubio as to who can come forward as being the establishment fusion, the establishment outsider fusion candidate, and then meanwhile Trump and Carson, I think after Iowa and New Hampshire, I think are going to sort of fall by the wayside once you get into the bigger states after that. That's my sense of what's going on.
Because I don't see any way that Ted Cruz could ever fuse the establishment to, I just don't see that he could have any appeal establishment-wise.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't put Cruz in that bracket with Rubio. I put Bush and Rubio in that bracket. I think the thing though that where Robert's right is with Cruz is the money. Yeah, which is he's got this traditional fundraising network and he has a traditional infrastructure in states. that I think
Yeah,
makes
and
it-
yeah, I
makes
mean,
it
that's-
more of a
We should separate financial elites from political elites.
Well, you see, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, he is somebody who is he's raising money from traditional sources, and there are a lot of people. I mean, and I'm one of them who legitimately criticize him because of his kind of trying to grind the Senate to the halt. But there is a segment within not just the base, but even some of the traditional sources too that feel that Mitch McConnell has not necessarily done the party any favors in terms of his leadership, and Cruz does not put those people off as much as he does some other people. So again, yeah, his fundraising has been remarkable, and we'll see. And in fact, he had a much larger fundraising quarter than Marco Rubio did.
Yeah. So I got a few more questions for you, but first I want to see if anyone in the audience has any questions for you. Yes, sir. We got a mic for you.
Thank you.
Got a candidate for office here.
Yeah, I am. For disclosure, I am a city council candidate in Upper Manhattan. My question for the panelists is, if I'm just lost on the African American candidate Carson. I'm happy he's doing well. I don't intend to vote for him, but I wanted to get a sense, if you could give me a sense of the demographics of the Republicans that are supporting him, like who is supporting him in I'm not the Democrat, the Republican Party.
Evangelical.
Who's supporting him in the Republican Party? What is the profile of the Republican that's supporting Carson? Thank you.
That's right. Annie said it. The evangelical voters, who I think there's sort of two buckets of it. I think there are folks that they want somebody who looks very different from what we've seen before as far as our nominee and how they're going to represent the party. So a neurosurgeon who's an African American, who's not an elected official and is not a part of the sort of career politician profile. The second part of it is they want somebody who is not afraid to talk about their values, and not afraid to talk about values issues. And there's a whole list of what would fall under values issues. But they want somebody who's going to be unapologetic in that sense, and offer this, again, a clash of worldviews between the left and the right. And they feel that Carson is somebody who's done exactly that, and it speaks to them in that sense.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, particularly in terms of Iowa, I think some of the Rick Santorum voters are the former Rick Santorum voters are definitely supporting Carson or looking very, very strongly at Carson, and. There is, of course. I mean, the fact is that he's an African American competing in a Republican primary, and I think the dynamics of Carson in the Republican Party are not. I mean, this is going to sound strange, but they're not as different as Barack Obama in 2008 competing against Hillary Clinton. The Democratic Party was initially, at least going into Iowa, there were many, even among the African American community, who thought that he can't win. I'm lining up behind Hillary because of Bill Clinton, the first black president. Blah blah blah. And when he won Iowa, that sort of gave those voters permission to say, "Oh, he can do this," and "Oh my God, it's a historic moment. We can let's get behind this guy. We can nominate him, and my goodness, we can actually elect an African American president." With Ben Carson, you've got an electorate that is tired of always being called racist because they have strong political differences with an African American president, and so they are one of the reasons they are looking at Carson is because he's an African American who is unafraid of challenging an African American at National Prayer Breakfast, and that's sometimes fortune favors the bold. And for a person who was very well respected within the black community for decades because he was the most brilliant neurosurgeon in the country. For him to step out into a political realm and challenge the President of the United States, that perked up the eyes of a number of Republican base voters. And then you add that fact to what Kevin said. He speaks to those values, particularly the evangelical values, and again, he's an outsider, and it's a potent mix for a certain segment of the party.
Next question. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, Liz, but I think on March 2nd, the day after Super Tuesday, the Democratic candidate will have been selected. Can the Democratic candidate, I think it will be Hillary, reconstruct the Obama voters at the polls a year from now?
Well, that's kind of, it's a complicated question because there was a New York Times story that came out a few months ago, and it talked about how, and as Kevin knows, that like you don't talk about strategy, you don't telegraph your strategy, you don't talk about process, right? And I think the Clinton campaign got pretty widely mocked for doing this, but what they viewed as the Obama coalition was women, black voters, young voters, Latino voters, and putting them all in different buckets. And the reason why, ultimately, sure, did we target different groups of voters in 2012 to reconstruct the Obama coalition to a much greater extent than I think Republicans were expecting? Yeah, we did. But we also made a broader economic argument that appealed not just to, a single 31-year-old white woman in Columbus who's pro-choice, or to a Latino 52-year-old Democratic-leaning or independent male in Miami, Florida. And so I think there's a big mistake. And I think we saw this mistake in 2014 when we saw a lot of candidates trying to run overly niche politics, just running on birth control, running only on single issues, and thinking, oh, well, if Barack Obama did it, then that's what worked. No, that's actually not what worked. What worked is that we ran, right, that was in Colorado Senate, in Udall when he lost, was because he thought he could just, one of the reasons why we won in Colorado in 2012 was because of the big push we did with women voters. But the overarching reason why Barack Obama won was because people thought he was on their side. They trusted him to handle the economy through these tough times more than anyone else. The other things helped, but that was not it. And so if let's go with your premise that Secretary Clinton's going to be the nominee. I think her campaign fundamentally needs to reorient how they think about the electorate, stop slicing and dicing them, and realize that the overarching thing that will unite the Obama coalition is a fighting economic message. And within that, we can play to different constituencies, but I think that was a big takeaway of 2014, and it's a lesson that the Clinton campaign hasn't yet learned. But I'm hopeful that whoever the Democratic nominee is will take the true lessons of the Obama campaign.
In the back. In the back. I got you.
Hello, Jeffrey. Good seeing you again. We saw you at Riverside Church on October 24.
Good to see you.
I see Bernie winning based on his performance. That's what I go by, the performance. Your behavior, your conduct, your performance. Okay? I can't see Hillary winning. She was involved, from what I read, she was involved in 17 scandals, including the email scandal. I'm sorry. Okay, one scandal can hurt your career. 17 can definitely hurt your career. It's like getting shot and stabbed 17 times. It's like getting operated on 17 times. It's like getting arrested and sent to jail 17 times. It's like appearing in court 17 times.
Do you have a question?
No, this is my comment.
Okay.
I see between Bernie and Hillary, it'll be narrowed down to that. I see him win. As far as Donald goes, he's wasting his time. He's imitating Michael Bloomberg.
Yeah.
Or say Michelle Bloomberg, aka the billionaire pimp.
Thank you for your comment. Uh-huh.
Kevin, I think that the reason that Trump is leading so is he's picked up the anger in the Republican Party against McConnell and Boehner if they haven't gotten anywhere against Obama by sending up omnibus bills. But he's the wrong messenger. And who do you think is going to be able to pick up that kind of anger to coalesce the party, and when do you think they're going to do that?
Well, I think you're right. I think that is some of it. I feel there is a core group of Republicans that believe that they sent a Republican majority to Washington to confront the president, and there hasn't been enough of that. I think the thing that this reminds me of a debate that we had internally in the campaign in 2012 was so many reporters were telling me there's no way Mitt Romney's going to win the nomination in 2012 because of the Tea Party. The ascendance of the Tea Party in 2010 created a lot of anger in the campaign, and there was no way, or a lot of anger inside the party, and there's no way that somebody like Mitt Romney was going to be able to capture that anger. What I thought was wrong with the diagnosis, which is thinking that you couldn't speak to the issues that animated those voters in a way that addressed them and ultimately helped bring them to your side. So we made a concerted effort to talk about the debt, the deficits, the amount of spending in Washington that was out of control. And by talking directly at those issues and offering an alternative, what the plan forward would be to address those, Governor Romney slowly but surely started to win voters that we saw that were registered, that were identifying themselves as very conservative or Tea Party voters in many of the early primary states that we ended up winning in 2012. So I think that's what one of these other candidates has to do, which is recognizing that there is this feeling that people in Washington aren't listening, that we need to close the gap between them, speak to those anxieties. I think Ted Cruz, I believe, is probably going to be the one that picks up from some of the loss that I eventually expect Carson and some of the losses that Carson and Trump go through in those early contests. So Cruz is going to be a significant force there, but ultimately I think it'll come to between him and Marco Rubio as we get later into the primary calendar through March and April. It'll be a battle between those two to win the hearts and minds of those voters. Now, the winner is going to have to unite the anti-establishment or the outsider anger with the promise of doing better than the current leadership in Washington for the future.
Right. So the winner might be the loser. I mean, just in the same way that like Kevin McCarthy was, he was seen as the heir apparent, and it's a very difficult task right now.
No, those are very different and unique. It's not the same when you're running in an internal caucus up on a conference up on Capitol Hill as it is speaking to voters who actually don't look at a lot of this through an ideological lens, but instead it's just who is going to bring more of a common sense approach to dealing with the issues that I'm pissed off about than is currently being used right now.
Okay. Gray blazer and glasses. I'll get both you guys, either one of you. You guys both have glasses, and you.
My heart is with.
I'll get you next.
My heart is with Bernie, and my head is with Hillary. However, I feel that we always hear that there's distortion in Washington, and we can't trust Washington and whatnot. And I see that once Hillary goes to the general election, how do we keep that Democratic ideology of, government works for us, government can do well for us when you have the right. Speaking, saying how much dysfunction there is.
Well, let's take a step back. I mean, I think that's a big challenge for them is that they're both, have spent combined, over 40 years in Washington. Neither of them have really gotten anything done or shown any ability to get anything they believe in through. So I think it's going to be if either of them become the nominee, it's going to take some jujitsu on their part. But as Annie says, sometimes it works.
All right, right in front of you.
Process is all locked up at this point. You just have to look at Hillary's leadership campaign to every elected official in the city, every rich person in the city. And on the national level, New York is going to go Democratic. So what is our duty as a New York voter this time around?
I assume that's. I think it is.
Drive to New Hampshire and go volunteer for Martin O'Malley.
Yeah, I mean, go out to Iowa, but no, I mean, look, it's in the primary. I think lobbing calls to Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada contribute to your candidates, but I think in the general, like. New York hasn't been a battleground for probably since you've been born. So I think things you can do, contribute. Obviously, contribute. That's the easiest thing. But go out to these states, volunteer. There's always help needed in places like Ohio, Florida, Iowa.
Iowa's beautiful in January.
Yeah.
It's only like 20 below.
But reach out to your friends. Reach out to your friends there. If you have a lot of money, start a super PAC, and I'll give you my card. And I'll offer you my services. But I think that there are a lot of things you can do, and I think it involves kind of getting out of the Acela corridor.
I am serious though about like the Iowa State Fair is definitely on. You should be on your bucket list.
Yeah, it's pretty
cool.
Yeah, it's
right there. Yes.
I guess I want to take this on a much more sort of fundamental level, which is that the voters, I mean, what you see as the voter, and I realize you're all speaking about an electorate, this and that. Since it's not monolithic, it's not homogeneous, you know that, given all the things. And you talk about the need for authenticity. I'm not quite sure what constitutes authenticity. Is it consistency? Because quite clearly, even everybody in this room, I cannot believe that you can all say you're consistent. But what's the basis for how you make a decision? And if what we're doing as an electorate is voting in somebody whom we believe to be a qualified representative of whatever our sort of issues are, what constitutes qualifications, what constitutes representatives, and as the media, why aren't the questions posed to the candidates as to how do you make your decisions? What do you take into account when you make a decision? Because I'm not asking you to go and say, this is the decision I made, and therefore from now on, that's exactly the decision. Because that would, to me, would be ludicrous for a candidate to sort of say. Because then I'm going to go, wait, you mean that regardless of the conditions, that's how you're going to go ahead and do, but what are your fundamentals? And I'm not quite sure why, both on the candidate side as well as on the media side, why there isn't a press to sort of say, what is your foundation? What is your ground?
I think, I'll just answer that real quick. If you go back at every single campaign, and particularly in presidential elections, I think this is very true. Every campaign that wins answers the question in the affirmative, does this candidate understand the problems of people like me? And that issues are important, but people don't go on and be like, oh, let me see, Obama's positions on tax reform, oh, check. Energy, healthcare, okay, Romney, up, okay, well, he wins, because on issues, he's won on me on issues. I mean, you even look at the last campaign. Romney, if you went down all the issues, who did you trust better to handle the issues? Romney won on all of them, but he lost big time on the question, does he understand the problems of people like you? So that's what voters do. Now, as far as like the press and how they go about exploring that, I'll leave that to Annie to answer, but we're looking at the fundamentals. That's the question that wins every single election.
All right, so the last 2 minutes here, we're going to do a lightning round, all right? So you have one phrase or one sentence, but no more than that. All right, gun control. Democrats have moved way left on this issue compared to where they were a decade ago. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is it going to help them or hurt them in the general? Annie?
I think Hillary Clinton thinks it's a good thing right now because it's a good contrast with Bernie, and it's the one issue where she can be to his left.
Yeah.
And I think that the country is in line with where she is, so I think it could be good in the general for her.
Okay.
It will hurt. Go to visit Mahoning Valley or go along in Tallahassee.
That's
in
Eastern
Florida.
Ohio.
Eastern Ohio. They feel very strongly that we don't need any more federal.
Can I add
laws.
one line?
You may.
Just to Hillary, I was in San Antonio covering Hillary. She talked about gun control in Texas. That's a sign. Like she thinks
She's already written off Texas in the
anecdotal
general.
evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Empirical evidence.
Liz?
Totally different.
I think it's a good thing because I don't think that you should just be driven by what people in Mahoning Valley or what people. Leadership is about showing that you're ahead of the curve and that you're willing to take tough stands on things. And one thing I'll point out is that Martin O'Malley has led the field on this. He's the only person that's gotten comprehensive gun control done, the only person who has a consistent record of standing up for comprehensive gun safety laws.
I think gun control is the one wedge issue that favors Republicans right now. With so many of the other ones have fallen into the Democratic column. Abortion is still kind of 50-50, but I don't think gun control works in some of those swing states that we just mentioned.
I think Rob and Kevin are right. I hate to say it, 80% of the country supports common sense gun control measures. The problem, and 15 to 20% don't want any more restrictions on guns. Problem is that 90% of the 20% vote on it, and about 10% of the 80% vote on it. And so I think it's an issue that's still going to favor Republicans in the general, unfortunately. Board Association, John Kasich.
Ohio.
Any shot?
Yeah. No, because I think Democrats like him, which means no.
He's done. John Huntsman problem.
Yeah.
Kevin. John Kasich.
Irascible.
Irascible.
I thought you were going to steal my word. I had erratic.
Erratic.
Likeable, but unelectable in the current Republican Party. I mean, in terms of the presidential politics.
Bill Clinton, net benefit or not?
Net benefit.
Always a net benefit.
Mixed.
Rob?
Always a net benefit.
Chris Christie?
Could have a moment.
Huh. Kevin?
It's not happening.
Yeah, missed his moment.
There's already a loud Northeasterner in that slot, and it's not him.
Which Republicans run the best campaign so far? Annie?
Rubio, I guess.
Cruz.
And Rubio's campaign has been sort of an anti-campaign because the whole point has been
stealth.
to be stealth and not poke your head out.
Right.
It's worked so far.
I mean, to peak, he wants to peak later,
in
not
December
peak early,
or January.
so that
right.
seems.
You said so
far.
far.
So Rubio, Cruz.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I continue to be amazed by Trump and the fact that he manages to get beyond these things. But I think otherwise, I would say probably Cruz.
Rob, best Republican campaign.
It's a toss-up between Rubio and Cruz.
Worst Republican campaign. Annie.
Jeb Bush.
Rand Paul.
Oh yeah, definitely. They're a good one, Rand Paul.
I mean, I guess I can't say Walker anymore, right?
Well, that's what I was going to go for. I mean, he was the guy who won 3 out of 4 statewide races in the Midwest and had all the money and didn't get into the starting gate.
Yeah, I would say Walker. And I actually have a counterintuitive view on this. I think Rick Perry was running a great campaign. I think Rick Perry has to be the most frustrated man in America because he got pilloried last time because they said, "Oh, you're too dumb and you're too superficial." And so he studied for 3 years. He developed some substance. He gave great policy speeches, and then he loses to Donald Trump. I mean,
you never get a second chance to make a first impression.
Totally. Worst Republican campaign. Oh, who is that? Sorry, best Democratic campaign.
I think that the Clinton campaign is executing on a plan and it's working, but I think Bernie has nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah, I think you got to go with Bernie because he's beating expectations.
Yeah.
I'm going to recuse myself.
Yeah, that's fine. Rob?
I think Bernie's the better candidate, but I think that Clinton has the best campaign all around.
Primary winners, Republican and Democrat. Annie?
Hillary Clinton and Marco Rubio.
Clinton, Rubio.
O'Malley and Rubio.
Clinton, Rubio.
And right at this moment, which party is better positioned to win the general election? The big kahuna.
I can't answer that. I don't know. I mean, it's going to come down. It's going to be very tight no matter what. I really don't know. I don't have an opinion.
I think the fundamentals favor the Democrats because we still have work to do with Latino voters.
Yeah, I think definitely, and I would also say, I think with if Rubio were to win, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done with women voters as well. So I think I think the fundamentals definitely favor Democrats.
I wouldn't disagree with that, but one of the interesting things that we find out in many campaigns, whether it's from local all the way up to the presidency, is fundamentals matter a lot, money matters a lot, but it also comes down to candidates. And I'm still not completely bought in that that Hillary Clinton is a good general election candidate, and she lost to a charismatic minority candidate last time around, and history could repeat itself in the general election.
Last question. Should Joe Biden have run, and would he have been a better general election candidate than Hillary Clinton?
No and no.
You can't talk yourself into running, so when you don't run, there's a reason you didn't run. You just can't get talked into these things.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think up in the air about whether he would have been a better general. I think he probably would have been a slightly better general.
I don't think he would have.
But I think, but as you know, you and I know this from 2012, is that he's a mixed bag.
Yeah, Rob.
I think he probably should have run, and I think he would have been a better general election candidate.
And then the very last question: should Eliot Spitzer be the next president of the United States? Thanks to all the panelists.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We talked ahead of time, and we decided that we were not going to, kick you out as moderator. So you're
Thank you all for coming. Politics and Policy Election Series. Come back for more. Thank you.